I don't know if this is coming across on the camera, if because there is stabilization on this camera, but I'm kind of amused by the lack of aerodynamics on this car. Who would have guessed that in 40 years, we've made vehicles cut through the air a lot easier? The cars next to me are not really rocking around, no surprise. This one here is actually quite violently rocking around. Oh, you bet I am absolutely excited about this. Hello! So, as you can see, I have purchased something enormous and incredibly reflective on the front. So, as you can see with the car that's hiding behind me here, that is definitely not something that's going to have an OBD2 port on it. And even for projects that were in the late 80s and into the 90s, OBD1 was still kind of a curiosity. Most vehicles were still using their own OEM-specific diagnostic connector for their computers. So as a result, diagnosing problems with them was difficult. But when you get into vehicles such as the 80s, the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, you get the idea. Yeah, it gets even more difficult because you have to do it all by hand. This here is the Sun Modular reflection, there we go, Modular Engine Analyzer. This whole box here is specifically designed to speed up the task of diagnosing an engine which doesn't have a diagnostic connector that you can work with. This is a very late revision. This is from about 1989, 1991. So as a result, there's a fair amount of tech that goes into this thing. You may already notice there's a printer there. We will get to that. What you're also looking at here is also something that isn't necessarily new. Since the beginning of the automobile, these kinds of diagnostic tools have been available really to anyone who can afford them. These are not cheap. This is like $15,000 right here when it was new. But these today, their values vary quite wildly. There is an older version of this. It's just called the Infrared Engine Analyzer. And it's pretty. It has giant displays, analog needles and gauges, a giant metal cart. It's very much a vehicle for the 1960s, the 1970s. That's for your Studebakers, your Dodge Darts, your Edsels. You get the idea. Barracudas, very fancy cars. They go into that nice, like, car collector's shop. Those things will sell for a minimum of $1,000. Fully restored, you're looking at like $3,000 American for that thing. That's a hell of a lot of money. This is everything that infrared analyzer could do, but with, what, 25 years of advanced technology added into it as well. This here, this is fun. Now, I checked on this. So, if you go to the auction liquidation sites, and sometimes even to eBay, you will find that many of these sold for $200, $150, $100, $75. There are several instances where I saw these things selling either with no bids, or the initial bid was made for $15 and it sold. None of the car people want these. It doesn't look great next to a classic muscle car at all. It has these, it has the super glossy cover over here. Sure, it has video displays. There's no gauges on this thing at all. You have these little tiny knobs right here, and that's primarily for the scope. But this will do everything that those old-fashioned analyzers will do, and more. So, this will do solid-state ignitions. This will do points ignitions. If we go onto the back here, there's a little switch here for saying what kind of vehicle ground polarity you have. negative ground, positive ground. So you can run this on a Nash Metropolitan if you want. And also, it's just, well, not only can it do points, it can do every type of ignition. What about the newer stuff? Well, if we look under here, where I'm storing all my other odds and ends, it will do first generation distributorless ignition systems with an additional module. So this thing, like, they're cheap. As of this video, these things are really cheap. They're enormous, but they'll do damn near every vehicle. And I can't help but feel there's a stigma no one buys these simply because, well, they just don't look like something you'd expect next to a classic car. But here we are. I managed to find one. I paid $150. It has some options. It doesn't have much missing with it. But now I'm going to take you through with a tour, and we're going to take a look at this whole thing. Let's start out on the top here. So you have this sun logo, Modular Engine Analyzer. It's highly reflective. This is actually backlit, so I have found when it gets too cold out, the light doesn't work, but otherwise, the switch on the back that turns the machine on can just turn the light on if you want, and then you can have it just lit up in the corner of your garage, whatever. We do have two displays here. So this one here is a vector display for the scope, so this is for ignition patterns and even for alternator and charging analysis. And over here is a raster display for a built-in computer. We'll explain about that in a little bit. This is standard equipment here. Every one of these analyzers come with it. Options include the boom mast. This is a separate part, so you get it without it. There's a set of bolt holes up here, and that's because the cart that this thing is on is an option as well. This is also an option as well. This is, well, it says Sun Electronic, but really no. This is just an Oki Data 9-pin serial printer, I believe. And it does work, I want to point out. For these knobs here, brightness control, positioning, horizontal, positioning, vertical, horizontal linearity, and just pattern sizing, and that's just simply for this display up here. And then I have an engine kill button. I'm going to try and demonstrate that for you in a little bit here. There is supposed to be decals that are on here, but for some reason someone hasn't painted it over, they've just stripped it off. So you can just kind of see the glue outlines where the decals used to be. There may have been some on the doors here as well. The cart's fun because you open it, it is magnetically held, and I just use it to store various components, accessories, manuals, and yes, I do have the operating instructions for this. The same thing over here. The distributorless ignition link actually comes with additional harnesses for those various distributorless ignitions. This will do a second generation Dodge Grand Caravan. At the same time, you can then roll up, like a 1940s Chevrolet and do the same thing with it, but with points ignition. It's great. And then I just have all my other diagnostic tools in here. That's an alternator tester, a custom engine analyzer tester I made for the AMC. And interestingly, there are pockets here. You can't fit the owner's manual in here for this. The binder's too big. So this is just for sheets of paper. I don't understand why. Otherwise, it's pretty featureless on this. Let's go around to the back of the unit, though. So, hiding back here, we have a pair of drawers. There's also cables and hoses. I'll explain that one in a moment. This side here, there's a couple of screws. You just simply pull it out. There's two serial ports here. The first one here says serial I/O port 1. That is RS-232. I don't know why it's RS-232. It isn't used. There's another option we can get for this, but it just uses the port 2. Here's our AC switch, like I said. Unit on, light on, just to keep the light on. I find it funny. Built-in circuit breaker. There's our ground polarity. Someone's taped this into the negative at one point, so they really didn't want to... I'm sure that would be very bad if you didn't remember to switch that correctly. But the idea here is you take the screws out, and it's amazingly serviceable. You just pull this out, and there are your power supplies. It's a combination of switch mode, I think some isolation transformers. You have a nice big fan here, and some rather horrific terminal doubling going on, but that's all original. Cool. There's also a substantial amount of grounding. Everything in this thing has ground straps. This all works. This actually came up relatively trouble-free when I got it and plugged it in. It's also worth pointing out in the back here, they'll typically put the option plates so you can see the other options that are installed in here. We have an amp and vacuum clamp, which is in this jumble of cables here, and that's available. What's interesting is that this also supports the magnetic timing option. So in some vehicles from the 1970s and the 1980s, on the timing cover, there's a little hole, and there's supposed to be an inductive timing pickup that's supposed to go into there. And at the factory, they use it for setting the timing without having to use a strobe light. I'm configured for that, but I don't have that one adapter. It's the one piece I'm missing, even though I'm configured for it. So I'm a little disappointed with that because that car supports it, of course. And then we have this thing over here. This is yet another option. This is the 4-gas module. So another thing that engine analyzers were used quite heavily for is for vehicle emission analysis. Basically making sure that your vehicle was, burning fuel correctly and stuff like the catalytic converter was behaving and all that jazz. So this will do 4 gases. It will do oxygen content, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbon content. You have this large pickup hose and this sniffer lead here. I don't think this is original. This just goes into the tailpipe of your car. There's a pair of filters here, both of which were disgusting and had to be cleaned. And then it gets pulled inside of the assembly here. And I can pull this out because it has this wire. There we go. Now, one thing, if you ever have seen one of these engine analyzers, is you never see the hoses like this. Thankfully, for the MEA 1500, on the Internet Archive, someone has archived the service manual. So I have the vacuum routing diagrams for this. So I went in there with food-grade vinyl tubing, because it's low off-gas material, and replumbed this whole thing. So this actually works. This is interesting because it has like check valve, there's a restrictor there, all sorts of things that will just kind of break and fall off and go missing. It's kind of annoying. But the gases in here are analyzed, they come in, it uses this Thomas vacuum pump that's hiding back here, and it just pulls into the system. This here is the Andros bench. It is basically a narrow band spectrum analyzer using, I believe, infrared light. And there's also an oxygen sensor that lives right down here. This oxygen sensor is really interesting because, so, you get these, they come in what looks like a little tiny like cat food tuna can. You open the can, you now have about 16 months to use that oxygen sensor before it needs to be replaced. This is just an age-failing part. There's no way you can get one of these. Even new old stock, if it's sitting in here and this thing hasn't been used in like 10 years, the sensor's dead. And that's the case here in this case as well. This is working relatively fine that I can tell, but we're not calibrated. I'll explain more on that. These are the various solenoids and electronic valves which control the routing of all the hoses here. Because not only will it be drawing air in, there's also additional ports here as well for a calibration gas, your exhaust port down there, and a leak check, which just makes sure that under normal conditions this isn't leaking and diluting the mixture that's going into it. This also has its own separate switch. And that would just kind of go back in there, but it's getting stuck, whatever, we're going to deal with that. And there is a nice little diagram here on how each filter goes together. This was throwing me off for a little bit because this water outlet's the only port on here which has an open section. And yes, that's apparently normal. A fair bit of water will also build up in here over time as well, so it does need a water drain port. And above that, we do have the back of the unit and all of our various cables that are plugged into it. So if you can give me a moment here, I'm going to take the back off of this and I'll show you the back, which is mostly displays and yet more power supplies. It's interesting with this back cover that it has these little hanger brackets. So even once you take all the bolts out of it, it will still hang itself off of the unit until you can carefully lift it off and remove it. Which is great because it means you won't damage any of the displays in here. So here is the top of the unit with the back cover removed. We have a modular Zenith chassis raster display that lives in here. It's monochrome green phosphor. And then on this side over here is this thing that Sun has built, and it's just an XY display, and that's what's for the scope. The high voltage power supply lives up there. It's basically a vector display. It does have this rather large capacitor that lives up here, and there's also a fuse that lives up here. that was interesting, because when I first got this, I noticed that I was missing a bunch of things. Even the strobe light didn't work, and of course the scope didn't work either. And what that turned out to be is that fuse there was bad. I don't know what caused the fuse to fail. It may have just been an age-related failure, but I replaced that fuse with the same spec and rating. I now have a spare here, and that all works now. So, okay, fingers crossed that doesn't misbehave. There's the fluorescent ballast back there. A lot of the cabling in here has been dressed in a very peculiar fashion. Part of that is to make sure that there is no interference. So you do have wiring that falls down here, wiring that falls down there. You have this ribbon cable, which is actually being held up. It's held in such a really nice way, so it's just kind of not being slung around. And then we have all these circuit boards under here. This is not how you access those circuit boards. For that, I'm going to spin the unit around, and I'm going to take the screws out, and it just pulls out as a drawer. Yeah, a drawer which for some reason uses these absolutely mind-boggling security screws. I was able to get them out. Surprisingly, I actually have a tool for that. But then, you just simply grab it here, and look at the serviceability on that. Just pulls out as a drawer. All the cables are nicely slacked. And this is the brains that makes up the entire engine analyzer. Starting with this board here, this is simply the XY control for the scope. All the wiring for the front knobs goes into that. That controls the scope, scaling, ranging, everything through there. This is the main logic board. So, it kind of looks like a computer, and that's because it is. It does use an MC6803 microprocessor for the embedded task. And hiding back here, we have a Hitachi HD 46505 CRTC. And next to it is a ROM. I'm pretty sure that there is the character generator data, pixel data, text data, stuff like that, the ASCII table. And the system ROM is hanging down there. There's a fair number of I/O controllers scattered around, but then again, let's not be surprised just how much I/O is being available here. The system is configured with these dip switches, and like I said, go online to the Internet Archive. There is a copy of the service manual which specifies what each dip switch does. This, on the other hand, is not original, if that is not completely obvious. So, for you folks who do stuff with the Apple II, you may remember the no-slot clock. Can I unplug this with one hand? Yes, I can. This uses a no-slot clock, which is sitting above the SRAM. Did I? Yes, okay. Anyways. So, we have a bit of SRAM here. We have this no-slot clock Dallas module, and it has inside of it 2 batteries. This module normally holds the calibration data for the gas analyzer. As a result, well, after, 30-something years, that battery went flat, the calibration data has been lost, so you'd have to recalibrate it. I don't want to deal with that crap again, so I took the 2 batteries that are out of there and just removed them, and I wired them to these 2 batteries here. These are Panasonic BR23As. These are 3-volt lithium cells. I love these. Every single time I find these in old computers, they are either close to dead or they're still very good. And they never leak as of 2023. And, well, Next used them a lot. These batteries are just absolute tanks. And on low current draw devices like the no-slot clock, where you're dealing normally with a button cell about the size of my pinky fingernail, yeah, this will last you, a good 40, 45 years. This here will probably long outlive the rest of the analyzer now, which is great because then I won't have to deal with it. There's also more space in here for expansion, and then we have other options that are in here as well. So this is control for the likes of the various inputs, the controls, the strobe. This here is an option board on its own for the ohms and for the amps and vacuum. And here's actually the little vacuum transducer right here. This here goes out to the boom arm. And the boom arm has all of this fancy cabling here. And it goes through here, and that actually has to be routed specially as well. And then it comes out here, and here are all our various cables. These are the original styles that were used with them. As we can see, they have seen a fair bit of abuse. There is even a pseudo-digital multimeter built in for volts and ohms. That's something I had to build myself. This is AliExpress stuff right here, but it's just silicone tubing. Looks great. This is our optional amp clamp. We have two high voltage pickups. This one here is your cylinder 1 pickup, and this one here is your secondary coil output. Those are both required. I'll probably demonstrate that to you. I have a vacuum line that's hanging here somewhere, so there's the other end of that vacuum transducer. Tachometer inputs, and then we have this thing up here. Remember, there's no other controls besides these knobs, so how exactly do you operate this? It has a keypad. A giant magnetic-backed keypad which has all of the controls for the scope and the interface, plus a button that's used to kill the engine. Again, I'm going to demonstrate that in a bit here. And it comes on a fairly long cord. So the idea is that you can actually have this strung over to the car, you can plug it in, and then if something goes wrong, just hit the engine kill and turn the engine off. So you don't even have to run over and turn the key off or anything. And yes, the boom arm does indeed make this very nice, so you can just kind of swing this out over the vehicle and have cables hanging down. I'm sure actually, if you look far enough into the Grand Theft Auto wiki, you'll actually have maybe recognized one of these from one of the various cutscenes or areas within the game, because like these were at one time incredibly popular analyzers with large garages. They did help to reduce time vehicles were on the bench or on the lift for diagnostics. And yet somehow, other than the mentioned missing magnetic timing probe pickup, which I don't have and plugs into the universal lead, really there's only one option here that I'm missing. Pulling this away, I have this gap right here. So, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, computerized vehicle diagnostics, which was still in a primitive state. Even with my older geo-tracker, when I still had that, it was a case of if there was a problem, you jumpered 2 leads, it gave you a blink error code, there you go. There was a data link that went in here, and it used that unused serial port on the back of the cabinet. The idea is that you would get and store in here a box of floppy disks with engine analysis and computer software that would talk to the computer inside the vehicle, and it would just, I think all it really did at the end of the day was it talked to like GM, Chrysler, and Ford vehicles of select models, and just simply took the blink codes it gave out and told you on the screen what it was. In reality though, I don't really care if that's missing. There's a far better solution to that. Hiding underneath all of my piles of screws here, we'll put those off to the side along with that. And by the way, these are the screws that hold the cover back on. This is the MPSI ProLink 9000 scan tool. This is like, what, early to mid 1990s? I paid $15 for this at Value Village. Online, maybe it's worth about $75. Unless apparently you have the diesel option, in which case these are worth like untold hundreds of dollars. I really don't care. But this comes along with support for Asian imports, GM engines, Chrysler engines, and of course, Ford. It also comes along with piles of cables, diagnostic jumpers, manuals, cables. This here, even though it's only probably a year or so older than this data link here, is considerably better. To the point I would say, never get the data link for this thing unless it comes with it. This is going to be 1,000,000 times better. Now, I've just spent all this time talking about the modular engine analyzer, what it does, who wants it, how cheap they are, and what every piece on this thing does. I haven't actually shown it working yet. I've alluded to it, and guess what? We are now about to show it working. So the first thing we're going to do here is I will go to the back of the unit, I will plug it in, and I will go to unit on. The fans will come up, I'll hear the printer initialize, I can hear the video displays, you might not be able to. Oh man, this glare is terrible. Okay, well then from this angle here you can see that the scope is working, but I keep that turned down so I don't burn in the screen. And then over here we can see, I'm just going to use myself here so you can actually see the display at all. Modular Engine Analyzer, version 7, 1986 to 1988 Sun Electric, and it wants me to press continue. Pump off indicates that the switch for the gas analyzer is currently off. So I'm going to hit the continue button here, and it'll go through a self-test procedure. The self-test procedures pretty much just make sure that electronically everything is good. It also says here 15-minute warm-up in progress. The gas analyzer is not ready to work immediately. It requires a warm-up cycle before it's ready to calibrate itself. You can do other things with the analyzer, but the gas analyzer won't be reliable, or I don't even think will work until after it's finished 15 minutes. So there we go. And even in the time I've talked to you, it's already down to 14. So for calibration, press continue, because we still have to calibrate the rest of the harnesses. So I'll do that. It'll tell me to disconnect all the leads from the engine, and I've done that. For the volt ohms, it wants you to bridge the terminals, so I just have those clipped together. And it'll go through those and verify that they're, well, either zeroed out or it sees continuity across it with the volt ohm. And this will take a moment here. So there's the ohm, so it saw that was good. Amps and vacuum, saw that was good. And then it goes down to HC, CO, CO2, and O2, which is the gas analyzer. Like I said, it still needs to go through its warm-up, so that's not going to behave at all until that's done its 15-minute timeout. Yeah, not calibrated, and the O2 sensor says service required. Whatever, I don't care about that. We know that that O2 sensor is dead. For vehicle test, press continue. For the program menu, press menu. Alright, we'll do the menu. There we go. And I want to point out, I don't know if it shows up in here at all, but these aren't square pixels, they're circles, they're little dots. I love the character set that the CRTC is working with. And we will go to vehicle setup. Now, for this here, number of cylinders, well, I have the AMC 258, so that'll be 6. Enter number of cycles. This will do 2 cycles, so yes, you can plug this into a Trabant if you want to, or some large 2-stroke engine, you can do that, no problem. Magnetic offset, well, like I mentioned before, I don't have the magnetic timing probe, so we can just leave it alone, and we'll set our vacuum display type. So I usually keep it at inches of mercury, so we'll leave that. Enter vehicle and press cursor. Where is the cursor button? There it is. Oh, so it's the enter button. There we go. To return to program, press continue. There we go. So vehicle test. If I hit that, I hear a solenoid click and it just goes to this vehicle test menu here. And that's just real-time data. Right now, as you can see, there's nothing plugged in, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to go back to the menu again. Power balance test. That's another test that requires the engine to be attached and running, so we can't do anything there. Our calibration, that there is for calibrating the system, so it goes back to that initial calibration. Gas calibration, leak check, and set gas tag values. The gas tag value is something that you will find on the back of your gas analyzer. I had to stop talking there because that fan is loud as heck. So that's all this does in here. So I don't want to do any of that right now, so I'll hit menu. There's the data link there, like I mentioned. That's that option that goes here that we don't really need. So even if I hit, what is that, 5? Yeah, it doesn't do anything. And then finally we go to the 6, the service menu. So I can do manual calibration for the gas and non-gas portions. We don't need to do that. Really, don't mess with the calibrations on this at all unless you know what you're doing. We also have fault code displays. So that's menu 3. Non-volatile RAM failure. So you probably saw when I had this pulled open and I had my battery module in there, 2 pieces of cardboard and the battery terminals. Right now, I don't have the batteries enabled, so the NVRAM is totally blank. That's one of the reasons why we had to do setup there, because, well, the NVRAM has not got any battery power, so it always gives that error. When calibration finishes, it's going to give additional ones for like gas span and a few others. Again, it needs a full calibration. It requires a calibration gas. I don't have the calibration gas. The calibration gas is expensive. So unless like someone legitimately wants to like show up and help me calibrate it, cool. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to leave that as is. So I'll go back to menu. And then we have serial I/O port self-test, and that's just simply for the serial port that's on the back of it right now, RS-232. All that's looking for is a handshake. And of course, I can do continue here, and because I don't have a jumper plug installed in it right now, it's going to give me a serial port failure. That's fine. You put a jumper plug on there that asserts CTS and a loopback, that will pass. So I'm going to hit continue again. No, can I go back to the menu? There we go. And then you have RS422 IO port self-test. The RS422 is the unused port on the back of this here that's just blanked off completely. That is for the data link option. It's so baffling. Why would you do that? Like, I understand 422 is differential signaling, so it's a bit more resilient to like engine noise and the likes. But like, you have a serial port there. I don't know what that serial port is doing. I don't think that serial port chats and does anything else or gives a prompt. It's just there. But it gives you an option there to diagnose and test it. Other than that, hit menu, like there is no auto test with this thing. There's nothing. And that's the reality of this thing. This is not a device where simply you hook it up to your engine, you push a button, and it just simply says, oh, well, spark plug number 2 is weak, and you might want to check these cables. No, this here is just simply a mechanic's aid. All you get is the vehicle test menu. This is really all you get. And the scope. That's it. There is no automation of this. Now, there is a model above the MEA 1500, the MCA Modular Computer Analyzer, or I think it's MCA 3000. It's larger than this. It has an IBM PC or PC clone that lives underneath here. It takes floppy disks. I've seen actually one with a CD drive in it because that's ridiculous. I don't have one of those for obvious reasons. I don't have space for one for obvious reasons. Maybe it's a bit more intelligent than this, but for the most part, this is what you got for like $15,000. So, what I'm going to do now is, because I think it's still in, hold on, let me go menu here. Yeah, it's still in the warm-up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that car, I'm going to pull it in here, plug it in, and then wait for that to time out, and then we are going to test that car. Okay, so I have pulled the Eagle in. We have the boom arm swung out here, and I have this myriad of cables that are plugged into all sorts of locations here on the vehicle. I might make an extra video just explaining how the heck this is all hooked up. For vacuum, it's interesting, so I have it right here. Normally I plug into the vacuum booster for the select drive down there, but since the vehicle doesn't need that when I'm just doing testing like this, I just unplugged it, boom, there's manifold vacuum right there. Battery voltage there in the starter, our ground is there. Notice the arrow here which is pointing towards the battery, the ammeter wants that, and the various other clips here. In the meantime, I've also strung out our exhaust line here, and now it says, warm-up complete, calibration required. Okay, so then in that case there, let's go to calibration. And gas calibration. Oh, right. Hold on a second here. Made a mistake. Right, so that was a mistake by my side. To do the system calibration and do the gas analyzer as well, remember how it said make sure everything's disconnected from the vehicle? Well, for the sake of this calibration, I just had to unplug our power leads and our amp clamp, which is just hanging out up here, and I just leave the rest of the vehicle off so the pattern generators don't care at all. So we'll do that. Disconnect all leads from the engine, sure, whatever. We're going to consider it disconnected at the moment, so it's going to go through that in a moment. It's worth pointing out that for this test here, I'm not actually using these leads, so these are going to stay jumpered. And there we go. Now it says these are all good. Of course, the oxygen sensor is still service required. Okay, let's then do press menu. There we go. We'll go menu again, and we'll go to vehicle test. Now, before we continue here, I'm going to go and take our exhaust gas sniffer. Just put that in there. There you go. And then all these other leads here that I disconnected, I'm going to save you the time of having to try and reconnect some of those. One moment, please. Boom, the magic of editing. Alright, so we're all hooked up, we're ready to go. Let's go back over here to my car, and I'm going to start it. Make sure your parking brake's on, by the way. So if you can hear me, there's our RPM right now. We can ignore the dwell. Strobe timing, ignore that. DC voltage is, well, we don't have that option. There's our battery voltage, and we're currently drawing about 6 amps off. Or is that charging? One of the two. There's our manifold vacuum. No coil voltage because we don't have that option. And the analyzer is not running right now. If I go over here to the scope, you might be able to see this. I'll turn it up. There's our pattern. Now I can switch on this to, say, our secondary. And this adjustment here just simply allows me to then set it to where I want. Let me take this thing off high idle. Hold on. There, I can hear myself think now. So this thing has a very low idle right now. Whatever, for the purpose of testing, that's fine. And as you can see, it's throwing off the scope a little bit here. Can I go back to my primary here? Hold on. No, that's raster. You will get some options that will show up on this screen as well, whatever. Can I go back to primary? Primary? No, will you let me? Oh, I've hit the wrong button now. Okay, sorry about that. Meant to be raster and display, so here's raster. Switch over to display. Boom, there you go. With a much neater looking waveform. Just bring that back up to the scale right there. And put it back down. And I can hit the super button here, and there's all sorts of additional modes that I can go into, both to help me with the charging system and the likes. It looks really nice. Like the tube is in excellent condition. Okay, whatever. So you get all of these neat options. We can see that my idle's right now sitting at 550 RPM, our dwell and all that. So at this point here, you can use your timing light. There's a switch here, and I hit that, and it will start blinking. And you probably cannot see this. Here, let me see if I can zoom in. This is going to come across difficult, but I can turn the dial, and I can actually line up where my timing mark is. Now I'm supposed to be getting this thing up to like 2,000 RPM or something like that to properly set my distributor timing. I should have about 15 degrees of advance at that RPM. That just overcomes the weights. But anyways, what you would do is you'd speed it up, you get it to that point there where it's supposed to be there, and it would be like 15 degrees. So I'm gonna zoom out and trying not to fail at this. So right now it says, alright, I have the dial adjusted about 13 point something, so I'm just going to tweak that a bit. There's 15 degrees. So say under normal circumstances we're like, what, 15 degrees? That's fine. So here we go, we're doing our analysis. The engine, by the way, sounds absolutely fantastic. So this all looks good, and now I want to save a hard copy of this. This is where the printer comes in. It's funny to note, this only prints the raster display and whatever is on the raster display. It's essentially a print screen. The scope is a completely separate analog component. You cannot print this. Even to get this on camera, it's kind of difficult, but you cannot print this. So I am just going to hit the print button. Uh-oh. And watch it. There we go. Oh dear, I've had it misfeed there. Okay, well you get the idea. Hold on a second, I could do better than that. Okay, let's try that again. Print. Looks absolutely pretty. Now, what if I want to hold this to check it? Well, there's the freeze button here, so I'll hit that. And it holds our real time exactly where it's supposed to be, so then I can do a printout. Now, what about this? I haven't tested this yet. Well, we can't control that from here. We have to go turn it on. So flip that on. You can hear it running. Now remember, this is not calibrated right now, so the information that we're seeing on this is not necessarily accurate information. It is funny to note, however, the sensitivity of this thing. If I blow into this, it will detect it. So I can see here 145 ppm, 146 ppm hydrocarbons. CO, carbon monoxide, is 1%. O2 is currently 0 because the O2 sensor is dead. And CO2 is about 12%. It does say pump stabilizing. I think that's still kind of an artifact of not being properly calibrated. But I bet you if I just kind of like jump the car here, it would... Actually, do I want to do that yet? No, I don't want to do that yet. There's one more test I want to do here, and that is if we go back to the menu, and I'm going to turn that pump off because it is a little annoying. While doing all those exhaust tests, check out the sheer amount of water that the sniffer managed to pick up. This is why the drain is in there. Shake that a little bit. Turn it on, and it just... Ooh, water everywhere. So we will go to the power balance tests. So we'll hit 3. So it's currently just testing to see what the RPM is. And it will set that as our base RPM, I assume. And now it wants me to hit continue. There you go. And the engine sounds crap. And you can probably see on here as well that we lost a cylinder. So what it's doing is it's, without actually interfering with the spark system, it's actually disabling cylinders one at a time. See, that one there just went flat now, so it's able to lock out that cylinder. Deliberate miss. And what it's looking at here is the change in RPM between each cylinder. Kind of helps you narrow down exactly what cylinder is giving you the most grief. This is looking pretty good so far. There we go. We're on to cylinder 5 now, I believe. There we go. Cylinder 5's looking a bit valid. What's going on here? And the last one. And there you go. And I want a hard copy of that, so I'm just going to hit the U. And there we go. And that prints out. So sure. Whatever, I don't want to repeat it. It smells very gassy here because we've been just running with a dead cylinder here as it deliberately did that. I'm going to go back to 2. We'll go back to that. Now, let's say something horrific happens here and I'm like, oh crap, I have to go stop it now. 2 buttons you can push. The engine kill here, the engine kill here. All it does is it just shunts the output of the ignition at the tack wire, presumably, and kills the engine. There you go. The engine's dead. Now let me go turn the car off before it destroys the coil. Really, this is a time saver. This is not a tool that every shop needs. And a good mechanic will probably be able to do everything that this analyzer can do, other than the gas analysis, without needing such an expensive piece of equipment. But at the same time, these are basically extinct at this point. The advent of the modern hand scan tool has rendered this, well, there's no need. The onboard computer of modern vehicles also does damn near everything that this tool does. Like, unless you have an older vehicle, no one has a reason to own one of these. Even for me. Like, you saw at the beginning of this video, it took a fair amount of effort to get this thing home. A full disassembly. Like, it had to be split into pieces. I had to go pick it up via ferry from Comox, BC. And even when I got it home, when I had to do my shelving here, I had to figure out a place to physically fit it. This here slots into this opening perfectly. It is an absolute monster. And even after all that, there's still the probability that things will go wrong with it. Like, we saw the printer jam up there. We need the O2 sensor, which is going to cost way more than I'll ever use this thing in the remainder of its lifetime. We have the calibration, which means I need to find a calibration gas. We had the fuse, which inexplicably failed and caused part of the unit to not work. Like, any number of things could fail on this, and the service manual is only going to help me so far. At the same time, this is really, like, unless you're a shop that needs to work on old vehicles on a regular basis, sure, I can see justifications to continue working on these. But for the man cave, if you really want one, get one. The MEA 1500s, as of this video in 2023, are still dirt cheap. Again, like as low as $15, like you're not going to spend more than $500 on one of these. Get as many options as you can. Apparently there's even tools and options available here for Mercedes diesel and GM high energy ignition. Like, this thing will adapt to anything, do damn near anything, and because it doesn't look like your classic infrared engine analyzer, almost nobody wants these things. The cart, at the very least, looks very nice and it's kind of reusable. Actually, it's interesting. This here and this here are two separate bolt-together pieces. Anyways, the reason I made this video is because there really are no videos on YouTube discussing or showing how these engine analyzers work in detail. There's like a short video or two, and really, that's all there is. Other than that, it's been kind of a mystery of what goes where, what cable does what on earth does the display do, what does the gas analyzer do, and so forth. This video is to help demystify all of that. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. I really do hope you enjoy these quirky tech automotive videos that I do make on a somewhat regular basis, but when it's sunny outside, there's no point to not at least try and work on the car and come outside. But that'll be the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good one.